Hey everyone, so we're just going to go over a couple of the case studies from the book. I'm mostly going to be reading the situations straight from the text so you have exactly what's going on in there in the video. And then we're going to go over a couple of the different analyses. You'll see me looking at the book a lot, so don't worry if you can't see my face. I'm just looking down at my textbook here. And remember, this is this textbook, the Ethics for the Information Age. I am using the 7th edition, so if you're using a different edition, your page numbers may be a little bit different. The wording of the situations might be a little bit different, but we're going to go over what I have here in the 7th edition. So if you turn to page 113, this is in chapter 3.2.3, we're going to talk about the case study of Anne, the Acme accountant. Okay, so a lot of A's. Anne, the Acme accountant. So Anne is an accountant at the Acme Corporation, a medium-sized firm with 50 employees. All the employees work in the same building, and Anne knows all of them on a first name basis. In fact, Anne distributes paychecks to Acme's employees at the end of every month. Anne's 10-year-old daughter is a Girl Scout. During the annual Girl Scout cookie sale, Anne sent an email to all the other Acme employees. She invited them to stop by her desk during a break and place orders. There's no company rule prohibiting the use of the email system for personal emails. 9 of the recipients were happy to get Anne's email, and they ordered an average of 4 boxes of cookies, but the other 40 recipients did not appreciate having to take the time to read and delete the unwanted message. Half of them complained to a coworker about Anne's action. Did Anne do anything wrong? All right, so what we're going to be looking at here is this particular situation. So in summary, Anne is an employee at this company called Acme, and she knows a lot of the other employees there, and she sent a more or less mass email to the other employees about her daughter's Girl Scout cookie sale. And we want to analyze whether or not there's an ethical issue with her sending out that email and why that issue might exist. So let's take a look at it from a Kantian perspective first. This is actually the first type of analysis listed in the book. And I want to focus in on how Anne is viewing her coworkers in this particular instance and how she's treating them for this Kantian analysis, right? So according to the second formulation of the categorical imperative, we should respect the autonomy of other people. We should treat them as ends in and of themselves rather than a means to an end. So if we look at this from a Kantian perspective, we're going to see that Anne isn't really treating them like autonomous people as an ends unto themselves. Instead, she's treating them as a means to an end, which is her daughter's Girl Scout fundraiser, which in most cases probably isn't that big of a deal as far as an ethical problem goes, but it does suggest that maybe Anne shouldn't have done this because she's more focused on using them to get their money for the fundraiser than she is on treating them as people. Rather than putting up this message in a way that maybe people can come and check in to see about it, she sent an email using a work account to something that wasn't really about work, right? Now, on the other hand, we do have the issue that there were some people who wanted to hear about the cookies, right? So she didn't send this email. Some people would have missed out, and in that case, she was treating them like people. She was giving them something they wanted, right? She was treating them as an enzyme to themselves. But maybe there's a way in like a middle ground between Anne sending out that email to everybody and Anne sending out that email to just the people that were perhaps interested. So maybe if she could have done some sort of opt-in system, this would have been a better solution than her just sending that email across the entire company. Now, with a company of what was the size? About 50 employees, this probably isn't a huge deal, but imagine if we scaled up that company, right? So if this company was not just 50 employees, but maybe it was 100 or 200 or 1,000, how does that change your perspective on this particular situation? So with 50 people and about 10 of them were interested, that's about a fifth of the people. That's not so bad, but if only 10 or so are interested in a company of 100 or 1,000, that's a lot more problematic. And this is going to very easily be seen as something like spam mail. All right, so if we look at the utilitarian analysis, we're just going to go over a utilitarian in a general sense. We're going to cover both act and rule. From an act perspective, she did increase potentially the overall happiness, because if we see how much people bought on average when they did buy those 4 boxes worth, right, compared to how people responded to the email when they didn't care, right, when they didn't want to see it, there's probably a lot more happiness gained from the boxes bought than happiness lost from the email being sent, right? How long does it take you to really read and decide that you don't care about a particular email? It's pretty easy to just hit delete on it and move on. But for those people who wanted this information, right, who wanted to know about these boxes and be able to buy some, their happiness probably significantly increased. I mean, I don't know about you, but whenever I buy Girl Scout cookies, I get very excited because, you know, they're Girl Scout cookies and they're very, very tasty. So my happiness is increased. And I'm sure that's true for these people as well. So from a utilitarian perspective, particularly an ACT utilitarian perspective, she probably increased overall happiness. Rule utilitarianism, this is probably not the case because, again, if we look at how we scale up the company, that's not necessarily going to be true. So we also have to look at the consequences of whether or not this rule could be applied to the system at large, right? So sure, in this instance, it's probably increasing happiness, but could everybody in the company send any kind of personal email, any kind of, you know, fundraising for their kid email, you know, every day or every week and it still be okay? Like if 50 people all had a kid who you wanted to help with their fundraising, like that's a good goal, right? But do we want 50 emails every time there's a fundraiser? That's a lot of emails, and that's probably going to overall decrease overall happiness if that's something we consistently do. So from a rule utilitarian perspective and from a Kantian perspective, this is probably not something that should be done. But from the ACT utilitarian analysis, we're going to say that that's probably fine. It really depends on exactly how much happiness was gained and lost, and it's hard to measure that without, you know, having a little bit more insight into each of the individuals. Now, with the social contract theory, there's no rule at the corporation against doing this. So from a social contract perspective, there's no contract about it, there's no agreement. She's probably fine. There's no violation of ethical norms. With virtue ethics, I'm going to go ahead and let you read over that one because virtue ethics is a little bit of a longer analysis. And it's also a little bit trickier to explain in this kind of video. But remember that virtue ethics is about what makes you a good person, like what makes a good virtue. And it's a little bit more nuanced than some of these other ones. If we look at it just real quick, good workers exhibit many virtues, including honesty, dependability, fairness, friendliness, and respect for their coworkers. 3 that seem particularly important for this case study would be honesty, fairness, and respect. So she met these things and she would be considered virtuous and ethical by this theory, and if she didn't, then she would be considered immoral by this theory. So you should take a look at that and take a little bit more look at exactly how that virtue ethics gets applied into this kind of scenario. All right, so, and again, that case study was on page 113, and the virtue ethics analysis happens on page 115 of the, again, 7th edition. I'm holding it up here. So 7th edition of the Ethics for the Information Age. All right, so the next case study that I want to talk about here is going to be on page 129, and I'm going to talk about that in the next video so you have these in chunks rather than one long video. So when we come back, we'll talk about the case study on page 129, which is Kate's blog.